Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Sample Mining, a podcast that, like the crate digging producers of hip hop, will mine for the greatest examples of sampling in music history. Gems only. I'm your host, Rob Bailey. In last week's episode, we discussed a sample that had a long lineage stretching multiple centuries of music history, one in which both the sample track and the original track were well known, popular songs from albums widely regarded as some of the greatest of all time. Albums and songs that have stood the test of time as they're still popular today, despite being released several decades ago. The instrumental sample last week was a little obscure and difficult to place, whereas the vocal sample was pretty obvious. This week, we're making a complete 180 and discussing an original song and a sampling song that are both less well known and didn't achieve the same level of chart or commercial success. In addition, each of these songs were released much more recently than last week's original and sampling songs. 1976 versus 1994, and 1992 versus 2017. This pair also features a sample that is very obvious and not difficult to decipher. So if you've heard the sampling song, you'll likely be able to identify it right away. This week, I'll only be playing one clip for you to guess from, so listen closely. That being said, let's jump into it and get started with the original to see if you can guess the sample. This is a direct, unmodified sample, so if you know the sampling song, you likely knew it right away as the songs start out almost exactly the same. If you don't know it, this week we'll be discussing the sample of the John Spencer Blues Explosion's song Bell Bottoms in Danger Mouse's song Chase Me featuring Run the Jewels and Big Boy from the soundtrack for the film Baby Driver. So, were you able to guess it correctly? I'm assuming in this case it was determined less by the skill of being able to identify the songs and more by whether or not you had ever heard Chase Me. Either way, let us know how you did in the comments on Instagram or via the episode poll. Before we get started, I'll play the primary sample found in these songs back to back. Here's Bell Bottoms again. And here's Chase Me.
Hey. Woo. Woo. Run it.
Hearing them back to back, I think it's pretty obvious how much was leveraged from Bell Bottoms for Chase Me, and you can probably now see why I said if you know the sampling song, you should get this one right away. It'll become more apparent why Danger Mouse leveraged the original so heavily as we dig deeper. So with that, let's mine. We're going to start our analysis of this sample with the song that, as we'll see, none of this would exist without. Bell Bottoms by the John Spencer Blues Explosion. The John Spencer Blues Explosion was a punk blues garage rock band from New York that formed in 1991. After playing separately in other bands, John Spencer, Judah Bauer, and Russell Simmons started playing together. Things clicked pretty quickly for them, and they had their first recording session just 6 months later in July of 1991. They capitalized on that momentum, releasing multiple follow-up albums in 92 and 93, and in October of 1994 released what's officially considered their fourth studio album, Orange, whose opening track is Bell Bottoms. The John Spencer Blues Explosion was known for their rambunctious live shows and their experimental sound, which drew inspiration from many different genres, including punk, blues, garage rock, rockabilly, soul, noise rock, R&B, and hip-hop, which set them apart from their peers. Unfortunately, that did not translate to commercial success, as 2 years after its release, the album had only sold 70,000 copies. However, it was well received by critics and underground music lovers alike. From the reviews of the album, two things are apparent. Their music was unlike anything else being released at that time, and people loved it because it was crazy. Tom Brehan of Pitchfork gave the album an 8.6 out of 10, calling it an absurd burst of swagger and libido as rendered by three total expert musicians. Tom Jurek of AllMusic gave the album 4 stars out of 5, saying, Orange is almost entirely new sonic terrain, but it keeps the trio's trademark sweaty musical terrorism and hedonistic rage up front. Michelle Romero of Entertainment Weekly gave the album a grade of B, saying, "The resulting cross between rock and roll and insanity can be thrilling in its fervency." Some of the terms used to describe the band and the album aren't things you typically hear describing music, such as detailing their style as a cross between rock and roll and insanity, or calling it musical terrorism. But the music was so different, I don't think anyone really knew how to describe it. And it obviously didn't faze the band at all, because they saw themselves the same way. In an August 1994 interview discussing the upcoming album, John Spencer was asked what he hopes the legacy of his music will be. He responded, "I hope that people who listen to it years from now still think it's crazy. I don't know. A lot of stuff that inspired me was just stuff that I thought was totally stupid, like American garage punk from the 60s, just crazy music. It was just great. It was a delight. It was bizarre. Just stuff that was really crazy, like the Electric Eels or Devo. I don't know. I guess I'm sort of picking things that were nerdy or goofy as well. But things that were just strange, but it was also good music." So it's easy to see where their inspiration came from, and that this was the music they wanted to make. It was crazy, but more importantly, it was also good music. And as a result, people loved it. They may not have burst onto the scene commercially, but they were very popular in the underground scene. This is best exemplified by two 1996 quotes. The first, from Mark Burton, who at the time was the buyer for Electric Fetus, which is a legendary Minneapolis record store founded in 1968. On the band, he stated, "Anything John Spencer is involved with is absolutely huge in this market. Spencer could hit as big as Beck did." The second, a quote from the marketing director of Matador Records at the time, Christina Zafiris, saying, "The band is already about the strongest mom and pop artist out there." Lastly, to drive the point home, here are some accolades Orange achieved. In the Village Voice's Top Albums of 1994 list, Orange was ranked album number 16 of the year, notably one spot below Beastie Boys' Ill Communication, 9 spots ahead of Pearl Jam's Vitalogy, and 17 spots ahead of Nas's Illmatic. Coincidentally, NME listed it as their 16th best album of the year as well, once again ahead of Nas, Pearl Jam, and Beck. The legacy of the album and song have held up over time as well. Bell Bottoms was included in Pitchfork's 2008 publication, The Pitchfork 500: Our Guide to the Greatest Songs from Punk to the Present, which is a book compiling the greatest songs from 1977 to 2006. And in 2018, Paste named it the 48th best garage rock album of all time, stating, "Even at peak grunge, these tunes stood apart for their greasy, leering abandon flavored by punk, blues, and rockabilly. Spencer, Judah Bauer, and Russell Simmons swaggered through Orange with startling self-assurance, skin-knee guitars tangling with overdriven harmonica, theremin for some reason, and yowling vocals, held together with taut, spare drumming. They're the guys who crash your party, dance with everyone's dates, and slip out just before the cops come to shut down what everybody agrees was a legendary time." At this point, you're probably asking yourself, why is this important? Why are you putting forth so much effort to detail how experimental and different, but popular, the John Spencer blues explosion, Orange, and Bell Bottoms were? Well, because that's where our story begins. Flashback to 1994, and there's a 20-year-old aspiring film director in Poole, England, without any film credits to his name. He's listening to a cassette tape of the album Orange, and he finds himself infatuated with Bell Bottoms, playing it on repeat over and over again. While listening, he found that he couldn't listen to the song without seeing a car chase in his head. That 20-year-old kid was Edgar Wright, and fast forward to 2017, and he's bringing that scene to life with his latest film, Baby Driver. Baby Driver is an action film which tells the story of Baby, a young getaway driver, who wants to get out of his life of crime and run away with his girlfriend, but is forced into driving during heists planned out by criminal mastermind Doc to repay a debt. He has tinnitus resulting from a car accident that killed his parents, but listening to music helps soothe it, so he always cues up the perfect songs to soundtrack his getaway drives. Prior to the release of Baby Driver in 2017, Edgar Wright had established himself as a successful director with a number of well-received films including Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and The World's End. He was known for his fast-paced satirical films and for heavily incorporating music into his films. As a result, the soundtracks to his films are widely regarded as some of the best, and Baby Driver was no exception. Not only was music heavily incorporated into the film, it was the entire reason the movie even exists. Explaining this in a 2017 interview with Esquire, Edgar Wright stated, "It basically inspired the whole movie in a way. I was 20 or 21 when the album Orange first came out, and I played Bell Bottoms on repeat on this audio cassette I had of it. I don't think I actually even bought it. I dubbed somebody else's copy because I didn't have any money at the time. I would listen to the song and I could imagine a car chase. And I wasn't even thinking about a particular film. It was more about not being able to listen to the song without seeing a car chase in my head. So at some point, I had to come up with something and I had to write a theme to go along with that idea and this vision I had of this car chase. So that, in turn, spawned the idea of Baby trying to soundtrack the entire movie. You're basically seeing the story through the ears of the main character." Media outlets and critics picked up on this fact rather quickly as well, with Esquire stating, "The summer hit will be remembered for its killer soundtrack as much as its car chases," and "each song plays as important a role in driving the narrative as the actors involved, in many ways speaking on behalf of the quiet, reserved boy nicknamed Baby." This is perfectly exemplified in the opening scene of the movie, which is set at the beginning of a heist. Baby starts playing Bell Bottoms, which is used to introduce the characters and kick off the heist. While waiting, Baby's jamming out to the song. Eventually, the robbery ends and the song also soundtracks the police chase and getaway perfectly. There's a 6-minute clip of the opening scene of Baby Driver on YouTube. If you haven't seen the movie, or even if you have, I definitely recommend you go watch this clip to get an idea of how well Wright weaves the song into the movie and uses it to take the storytelling to a different level. It even goes as far as to have view changes and gear shifts align with drum beats and guitar strums, and the volume of the music go down when Baby takes one earbud out and then back up as he puts it back in. This interdependency of the music and the film are on full display throughout Baby Driver, and is part of what makes it such an amazing movie. The story alone, without the strength of the soundtrack and song choices, makes this a great film. But the way those songs are used to elevate the movie and tell the story in a different way is unprecedented by film producers outside of Wright. In fact, it's so apparent and such an integral part of the film that I had many people tell me personally I had to watch this movie. It was so obviously intentional and important that even the casual movie watcher could pick up on it. So I had everyone from close friends to kind of infrequent acquaintances, but people who knew how much I loved music and nerd out on this type of thing, stress to me that I needed to see it right away. To further drive the point home, one of my best friends bought me the soundtrack on vinyl to ensure I listened and appreciated what Wright had put together. Shout out to Nick for that one. Needless to say, I listened to the soundtrack and watched the movie and loved both from start to finish. And to sweeten the deal, one of my favorite artists today, Run the Jewels, was tapped to be a part of it. And that song, Chase Me, which is produced by drEaMs, incorporates one of my all-time favorite samples, the one we're discussing today. Brian Burton, aka Danger Mouse, is a musician and producer originally from White Plains, New York, just outside of New York City. He moved to Stone Mountain, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, where he attended and graduated high school. After studying telecommunications at the University of Georgia, Danger Mouse's rise to prominence began in the early 2000s with his release of the Grey Album, an ingenious mashup of the Beatles' White Album and Jay-Z's Black Album. It incorporates a cappella versions of Jay-Z songs with instrumental samples from the Beatles. But this wasn't just any old mashup album. It received glowing reviews and was even named as the best album of 2004 by Entertainment Weekly. Despite that, and the fact that he reportedly had approval from Jay-Z and the living members of the Beatles, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, the Beatles copyright holder, EMI, ordered distribution be stopped at once. In protest of EMI, activist group Downhill Battle coordinated what they called Grey Tuesday, in which participating websites would host the album for free download for 24 hours. Hundreds of websites publicized the event, with 170 hosting the album for download. Over 100,000 copies of the album were downloaded that day alone. From there, his popularity only continued to grow, and he has since been nominated for 22 Grammy Awards and has won 6. He makes up one half of the group Gnarls Barkley with CeeLo Green, and has worked with numerous successful musicians including Adele, the Black Keys, Gorillaz, MF Doom, Black Thought, Beck, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Portugal the Man, Norah Jones, A$AP Rocky, and on this track, Run the Jewels and Big Boy. Detailing how Danger Mouse and his label, 30th Century Records, got involved, Edgar Wright said, Brian saw the first cut of Baby Driver last year and immediately inquired about the prospect of releasing the soundtrack through 30th Century Records. As I was finishing up the movie and putting the 29-track soundtrack together, Brian had the idea to do a remix based on the opening track of the movie, Bell Bottoms by the John Spencer Blues Explosion. It's apt that we used this song as a jumping-off point, as the nascent idea of Baby Driver came to me in a dream after listening to Orange a hell of a lot when I was 21. And on top of that, both Killer Mike and Big Boy make brief cameos in this Atlanta set movie, drinking with Kevin Spacey's crime boss at a fancy ATL eatery. I'm thrilled how Chase Me turned out, a great collision of 5 of my favorite artists. In his own words, Danger Mouse explained, Edgar showed me a cut of the movie last year, and I loved the Atlanta connection. I've been doing more hip-hop stuff recently, so I bugged both RTJ and Big Boy to jump on it. We've all known each other for years and talked about working together before, so I'm really glad this could happen now. With the movie being set in Atlanta, getting Danger Mouse involved made sense, and him getting Big Boy and Killer Mike on the track was an easy decision given all of their ATL ties. Most people are probably aware that Big Boy makes up one half of the all-time great hip-hop duo Outkast, while Killer Mike makes up one half of Run the Jewels. Killer Mike and LP both had long, successful careers in rap before they were brought together in 2011 to work on Killer Mike's 2012 album, Rap Music. LP produced the entire album and featured on one track. This collaboration ultimately spawned the supergroup Run the Jewels, who are currently on an amazing 4-album run. In my opinion, they're currently at the top of the rap game, and their verses on this track profoundly support that argument. Jumping back to Chase Me specifically, let's take a look at some of the other samples found in the track outside of that opening guitar riff. There are a couple of subtle vocal samples found in Chase Me, one from Baby Driver at the beginning, and one from Bell Bottoms at the end. First, here's the opening of Chase Me with the sample of the news report from the film.
Here's what we know. 2 men and a woman came into the bank branch clad in black business clothing, trench coats, bandanas, and sunglasses. They pulled guns and ordered everybody to the floor. They then cleaned out the registers, and hear this, they even swiped jewelry from some of the customers.
I think this is a subtle but great addition to the song, as it really sets the stage for the theme of the song and lets you know what you're about to get into. You hear that there's been a bank robbery, and then they say they even swiped jewelry from some of the customers, which to me is a nod to Run the Jewels, who are about to open the track. Interestingly enough, the movie was complete when Danger Mouse saw it, and the song was written after that. So either there was a crazy coincidence here, or it's possible they went back and added it to the news report of the movie after the fact. Given how intertwined the song and film are, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. At the end of Chase Me, there's also a sample of John Spencer talking in Bell Bottoms. Here's that part from Bell Bottoms.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, I got to tell you about the fabulous, most groovy Bell Bottoms. Bell Bottoms. Yeah!
And here's the sample of that at the end of Chase Me.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, I got to tell you about the fabulous, most groovy.
Throughout Bell Bottoms, there are multiple instances of John Spencer just talking over the track. This was a subtle addition by Danger Mouse, but again, it's a nod to the John Spencer Blues Explosion, and is just one more example of how the music and film all tie into one another, which you'll see is a common theme in Baby Driver. Another example of this is the fact that the score instrumental that opens the movie also opens this song. Again, it's not a major part of the song, but it plays in the background during the news report at the beginning, and is another subtle way that these are tied together. Here's that clip of the news report again. This time, pay attention to the music in the background, as that's the sample from the score.
Here's what we know. Two men and a woman came into the bank branch clad in black business clothing, trench coats, bandanas, and sunglasses. They pulled guns and ordered everybody to the floor. They then cleaned out the registers, and hear this, they even swiped jewelry from some of the customers.
Before moving on, I wanted to discuss one more element from the song. Even before I decided to start this podcast, this sample had always been one of my favorites. Having listened to it quite a bit, I always assumed that what I believed to be a bass line throughout the verses of the song was also a sample from Bell Bottoms. However, as I started researching the samples, I didn't see any mention of it, so it's possible I'm hearing something that isn't there. I'll play these for you now as well, and you can check me on this and see if you're hearing the same thing. Here's that section from Bell Bottoms. And here's what, to me, sounds like that same bass line in Chase Me.
Runner, gold dripper, flow flipper, smoke killer, slow zipper, quick temper, temperamental, sharp mental, departmental, tight fella, when wanna be him, when wanna see him, data tight, really be jealous, get your height.
So what do you guys think? It's obviously not a direct sample, but seems like it could be a modified sample as it's similar enough. Are you hearing the similarities that I am? Or am I wrong on this one? For me, it's so similar, and given that there are several other ties to the original track and to the film, it just makes sense that there would be another element of Bell Bottoms found in Chase Me. But I want to hear what you think. Comment on Instagram to let me know if you hear it, or if I'm just making things up. And as far as samples go, that's it. There are no other samples found in this song. Only the 3 elements from Bell Bottoms and the 2 additions from Baby Driver. This keeps the ties of Chase Me solely to the film and the original song sampled, which strengthens the connection. And it's obvious that this close connection was important to all of those involved, as the incestuous nature of these ties are pretty evident. Let's summarize all of these ties now. Everything in this film and song are tied together several times over. The most obvious is the fact that Bell Bottoms was the entire inspiration for Baby Driver, was used in the opening scene of the film, and as a result was the most obvious song choice for Danger Mouse to sample when creating a new track specifically for it. However, even this connection goes deeper as you look behind the curtain, starting with the cities of origin for those involved. Baby Driver is set in Atlanta. Danger Mouse grew up in the ATL and calls it home. When he was looking for artists to collaborate with on the song, he reached out to Big Boy and Killer Mike, 2 prominent Atlanta rappers who maintain close ties to that community today. Not only is there an ATL connection, but an NYC one as well. Danger Mouse opted to have Run the Jewels on the song, not just Killer Mike, who is one half of the group with LP. LP is from Brooklyn, and Danger Mouse was born and lived outside of NYC before moving to the Atlanta area. So Danger Mouse bridges the gap between the artists from the ATL and NYC. The connection goes beyond that still, as both Big Boy and Killer Mike make cameos in the film, drinking with Doc's boss in one scene. And speaking of making cameos in the film, John Spencer of the John Spencer Blues Explosion makes an appearance towards the end of the film as well. So not only are these artists involved in the soundtrack, but several are also in the movie itself. And to add to that, unsurprisingly at this point, the music video for Chase Me is closely tied to the film. It starts with a reenactment of the opening scene of the film. Baby starts a song on his iPod, though instead of Bell Bottoms, this time it's Chase Me. Danger Mouse and LP hop in the car with Baby and are involved in a car chase with scenes from the film seamlessly intertwined into the music video. Big Boy and Killer Mike come into the video involved in a car chase of their own, rolling through the streets of Atlanta with Big Boy driving and scenes from the film once again incorporated. At the end of the video, LP meets up with Big Boy and Killer Mike, they each take their cut of the money, and RTJ leave on foot in one direction as Big Boy drives off in another. So yeah, as you can see, all of these artists and pieces of art are linked together, and not just in one way, but in each case there are several elements tying them together. And I'm going to add one more connection that Edgar Wright and Danger Mouse likely aren't aware of. And that's the connection between everything else in this episode and the sample mining podcast itself. Obviously, we're discussing this sample, so I created a tie there. But sampling is something that helped Danger Mouse rise to prominence, and something Edgar Wright was conscious of when creating Baby Driver. As we discussed, Danger Mouse burst onto the scene with his release, the Grey Album, which was composed solely of samples. He sampled instrumentals from the Beatles and paired them with samples of Jay-Z's vocals. And as we discussed earlier, this caused some controversy upon its release, and also brought the art of sampling to the forefront of the conversation. It takes a lot of skill to properly use a sample to build upon what you're creating and make something new, fresh, and in the producer's eyes, hopefully better than the original. But not everyone feels that way. Some feel that it is simply stealing, that it doesn't require talent or skill, and that the only reason these songs are popular is because of the success of the original. Obviously, Danger Mouse doesn't agree with that sentiment. Responding to the Grey Tuesday event at the time, Danger Mouse stated, "It was not my intent to break copyright laws. It was my intent to make an art project." Further discussing the album, he said, "A lot of people just assume I took some Beatles and, threw some Jay-Z on top of it, or mixed it up or looped it around, but it's really a deconstruction. It's not an easy thing to do. I was obsessed with the whole project. That's all I was trying to do. See if I could do this. Once I got into it, I didn't think about anything but finishing it. I stuck to those two because I thought it would be more challenging and more fun, and more of a statement to what you could do with sample alone. It is an art form. It is music. You can do different things. It doesn't have to be just what some people call stealing. It can be a lot more than that." And in my opinion, Danger Mouse demonstrated that not only with the Grey Album, but with Chase Me as well. Considering Bell Bottoms didn't have a lot of commercial success, I would argue that in this case, the sampling song actually contributed to a newfound resurgence of the John Spencer Blues Explosion, Orange, and Bell Bottoms. That Chase Me introduced them to a new generation of music lovers like us, who heard the sample, loved it, and had to know where it came from. Edgar Wright seems to be of the same mindset, stating, "My dream for this movie is that 15-year-olds might see it, hear Bell Bottoms, and go, 'What is this?' and listen to the rest of the album or find more of the band's music." He was speaking about hearing Bell Bottoms in the movie, but the same can be said about hearing the sample in the song Chase Me. I'm confident that Edgar would support that point, as sampling, like all of the other subtle details throughout the film, is something he definitely was aware of when creating it. In the Esquire interview, he details one of the first times he experienced sampling, hearing Isaac Hayes' theme from Shaft being sampled in Young MC's song Know How, which is actually used in Baby Driver. We're not going to dive into this sample, but I will play those songs back to back for you to hear so you know what songs we're talking about. Here's the beginning of Theme from Shaft by Isaac Hayes. And here's Young MC's sample of that in Know How, starting from the beginning. Before we continue, I just wanted to note that I think it's interesting how this sample is similar to Chase Me, and that the track opens up with a direct sample of the opening of the original song. That's just another tie between all of the elements of this sample and the film. Back to the original intent of highlighting this. Speaking on that specific sample, Edgar stated, "I was in art college, and it was one of the first times I'd ever been to a nightclub. Again, I was not that hip when I was 20. So I went into this nightclub for the first time, and I heard what I thought was Isaac Hayes' theme from Shaft playing. And then Young MC starts rapping, and I was like, what is this? Meanwhile, people are on the dance floor going nuts." Elaborating on the use of Know How in the film, Wright states, "It comes late in the film, and by that point in the movie, there had been quite a few songs that had been sampled for famous hip-hop songs. The idea of wrong-footing the audience a little bit. They hear the intro to Harlem Shuffle, and half the audience are expecting Jump Around by House of Pain to start up. Then The Edge by David McCallum, which was sampled by Dr. Dre. And then there's the Detroit Emeralds' Baby Let Me Take You in My Arms, which was used for De La Soul's Say No Go. But then I wanted to flip it the other way. So when Know How kicks in, I wanted people to think it was Shaft. As you can see, Edgar was aware of sampling, and there was a reason for that. He discussed this in an interview with Vanity Fair in 2017, who summarized his difficulty with sampling, stating, "When it came to clearing the music rights to the film, Wright said he had no issues given how eager bands were to be part of the film. His only snag came in the pursuit of certain hip-hop songs who had not themselves cleared the right to music they had sampled. In those cases, Wright says he often went back to the source and just used the original song instead of the hip-hop or dance remix." So there you go. Another tie in this crazy circle of ties found throughout this sample, the film, and now sampling in general. Everything comes full circle in this one multiple times over, which again strengthens each of them independently and helps build the story as a whole. If you're listening to this podcast, you likely enjoy digging into the details of music or film at a deeper level than most people. And I think the details of this story support the argument that both Edgar Wright and Danger Mouse are, as I would say, our people. They're paying attention to every detail in their art. When creating, they're asking, how can I use music to take this film to the next level? Or, what song can I sample to create a tie between the film and my track? It's apparent that they want us to dig deeper and further explore those details. To ask, what is the song sampled here? Or, what's the story behind using this song at this point in the film? And in my opinion, it makes us appreciate not just Baby Driver and Chase Me that much more, but Bell Bottoms and the other tracks found in the film and soundtrack as well. The level of detail employed by Edgar Wright to incorporate music into his films to elevate the storytelling, and by Danger Mouse in making a banger of a beat with his use of the sample of Bell Bottoms for his track created specifically for this film, are genius level, and I have a much greater level of appreciation for each of them knowing the story behind this sample and the film. Thanks for joining me this week. I hope you enjoyed digging deeper into the story behind this one and have a much greater appreciation for it. If you'd like to explore the samples discussed in this episode further, check out the Sample Mining playlist on Spotify or Apple Music. If you have any suggested songs you want to hear us cover on the show, reach out via social media. Sample Mining is written, recorded, edited, and run by me, and every bit helps. So if you enjoy the show, please spread the word and follow us on your favorite podcast platform and on social media. Next week's episode will be a little different. Instead of going into great detail on the story behind a single sample, we're going to briefly highlight the samples found in several songs instead. It should be a fun one, so be sure to join us next week as we go mining for more gem samples in music.